Thank you, everyone, for being here. I believe all of you have been here before, so if you have a question, we will be having short breaks there. Feel free to ask it then, or feel free to type it into the chat. Today, we'll be talking about values and where it is on the pyramid. Uh, David, I'll just leave it to you to discuss. Let's just start with what are values? And then, the other thing that we've talked about that I think is important is why is the context so important
Okay, yeah, good point.
dealing with values?
Thank you. I think what I'd like to do, first of all, is let me request I hand it over to you, Joe. So give me a option to share. Okay. I want to share just there we go. So I want to share what we've got so far about. Can you guys see that? Yeah, there we
Yes,
go.
now.
Okay. So uh, on the document that I sent to you that describes this, I've been adding to it as we go up. So just recapping everything. Uh, I want you to think of, first of all, the context of what you're doing. And either it is A, helping people as a hypnotist or as a coach, or maybe you're trying to influence people without doing, maybe you're in sales, for example, and you're trying to influence people to help make better decisions. Or even more importantly, where I want you to all think about this is it would be great if you thought about applying all of these to yourself, because this is a incredibly in-depth and dynamic personal change mechanism. So starting off, looking at the behaviors, you look at the things that you're doing that you would want to change, or what someone else is doing that they're not satisfied with. Uh, then going up above that, you have emotions. It's emotions that influence behaviors. And if you're able to change those emotions sufficiently, you can change the behaviors. Then going up with the beliefs, the things that people hold as true. And so now we're going to talk about values. And talking about values, I'm going to address that question that Joe asked, which is, what are values and why is context important? So values are the things that we hold most important in life. Now, I said in life, but in life is a context. If you want to influence someone's whole life behavior, you would ask them, what's important to you in life? And they will tell you a list of things. These things will typically be values. A good example of what they may say as values that are important to them. They may say that family is important. They may say that career is important, or being honest, or loyalty, or creativity, or adventure. All of these things are things that would move someone in a particular direction. And most people don't even think about values. Uh, they are just moving from one thing to another. And they may think at one point a particular value is important, and they act on it. And then another moment in their life, they're acting on an entirely contrary value that goes against the previous value. For example, someone may really like adventure, and so they go on incredible adventures. For example, they may go skydiving, and they get up on the airplane and they're petrified and terrorized, and they jump out of the airplane and they experience a whole fleet of emotions and finally land and celebrate. And they find themselves completely exhausted and they realize, okay, what's most important to me in life right now is safety, security, and peace. So you have these two values that over time change. that does happen, but people typically are not aware of them. And I've only spoken about values in the context of what's important in life. We have all sorts of contexts that have a different set of values. One would be what's important in relationships, what's important when you buy a car, what's important when you're searching for a career or making a business decision. And whenever you ask that of yourself or another person, you're going to get a specific set of answers that are going to be unique to them. If you're doing this elicitation on someone else, take note of what they say because it's absolutely vital. If someone says, what's important to me in a car, and you're selling a car, is security and efficiency, you're going to be focusing on those values everywhere you go when you talk about that car. Likewise, Joe and I were just, speaking about how we used values in dating in those earlier eras of our life when we dated. And what you find is you can elicit over a conversation what's important to you in a relationship. And whatever they tell you, you first agree with it, and then you talk about it, and you ask them to define what that particular value means. And then you do your best to demonstrate those values. And what you can do in an incredibly short amount of time is create someone who is very interested in seeing you. And that's in the dating context. So it's always good to, when you're working with another person, to figure out what context you're going to be using. If you're sitting down with someone as a hypnotist or a coach, let's say they want to quit smoking, and you would ask them, well, what's important about quitting smoking? And they're going to give you the values that are a part of that. And don't assume anything because everyone has a different set of values. Some people are going to say, well, what's important about quitting smoking is I'm hacking up a lung in the middle of the night and my health is important. Okay. Someone else will say, what's important, when you ask them what's important about quitting smoking, they'll say, I really hate myself as a smoker. So they want to feel a sense of self-acceptance and love. And what you do is you ask the question, what's important about it, make a note of that, and use that in those things in conversation to move them in the direction that's important. Let's pause for a moment. Let's consider what it is we're doing when we, in this case, we, give me a moment here. I'm adjusting my display here. Let's consider that we're doing this for ourselves. The first thing I'd want you to ask is, for yourself, what is important to me in life? And once you have that, ask yourself what that means. So you don't just want to know what the value is. You want to know what the definition of it is. And you do this in writing. And you write down, for example, if being a decent person is like your highest value, you write down what that means. And as you write it down, you have something to reflect upon. You ask yourself, what else is important to me in life? And it could be at some moment in your life, it could be a sense of stability. That's very important. At another moment in your life, it could be a sense of excellence. And each time you do this, you write it down and you reflect upon it on a daily basis and measure how much you're living up to that value. And it's very typical that please don't be surprised if you find yourself humbled and disappointed that you are not living up appropriately to that particular value. It's not unusual at all. What it is just a starting point. And so once you look upon your day and ask yourself, how did I do this? How did I live up to these values? You have something to measure. Anyone here who is familiar with the American patriot and politician Benjamin Franklin, he wrote a great deal. He was a printer and a very prodigious writer. As a printer, he wrote up a book for himself. He made a book for himself that listed what he called his virtues. And the virtues, as you read them, if you read his autobiography, the virtues are in fact values. And he describes every one of them. And every day, at the end of his day, he would look at each one of these virtues that he called them and ask himself, did he live up to the virtue as he described it? And he would make a note. Now, if you've ever studied Benjamin Franklin, he was a pretty prideful person. One of his virtues was humility, and he said over time he got incredibly good at living up to all of his virtues, except humility, because whenever he felt he was doing humility really well, he felt very prideful, and so that was the only one he was most challenged about. But if you study his biography, just by doing that, he got a lot done. So, you know, how he helped negotiate with France to secure support from the Civil War to fight against the British, and became very famous for it. So let's continue on here. Joe, you want to interject? Is there something here you?
Yes. One of the things that I did, this I
Mhm.
don't think will apply so much to the group, but it does since this is advanced. But with clients, a lot of people have no clue what their values are. So I put this little list. It's kind of a cheat sheet that I will use for clients from time to time. And it's a bit tedious, but you would just start with like the top two, freedom,
Mhm.
family, whichever one's the first, then you go make that the first, and then you would go, okay, let's say it's family, so family versus loyalty. And that can be a little cheat sheet that you use for yourself if you're having a tough time or for clients that are frustrating you.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And now, if you're a person who's working like me as a hypnotist, I don't really touch on values too much. There's a portion of my 3-session hypnosis practice where I do where I do mention values and try to instill the ones that are most important. But yeah, Joe is right. Uh, if you haven't thought about values and you start realizing, okay, this is most important to me in life, and you start looking at your behaviors, you will typically find yourself very disappointed in how you're not living up to your values. That's always a first start. And your objective from that point on is to become aware of how your actions and behaviors can start to align with your values. So if you hold a value of integrity, of health, of honesty, and you're a smoker, you have to ask yourself, how much of my integrity am I compromising as a smoker? How much of honesty do I have to lie to people about my smoking? And how much of honesty and integrity and health do I have to compromise? Once that starts to click, you begin to start taking this much more seriously, and you start to measure small, very small actions and notice how good they feel. So just by delaying the next cigarette, you realize I'm living up to my values and you really, really like it. Let's see. Also, now as you do this, as you elicit your values, determine the hierarchy. They will always come in a hierarchy. There's always going to be a value that is going to be your most important. And the hierarchy of these values is important because you are going to be faced with decisions in your life where you'll have to make a decision. And one decision is going to benefit one value and it may go against another value. So if you have those values in mind, then what you can do is very quickly make your decision. Say, well, this is not an easy decision because it violates one of my values, but I'm going to pick the one that's most important to me to live up to. Okay. So it's always good to take some time to set up a hierarchy of these values. Okay, so I've only been talking about this for 18 minutes. Doing this process is not an 18-minute process. It is a daily habit that you have to do. And I have heard people, I think very wisely say, when you start this process, you have to take almost full 3 days to determine the values you want to live by, their definition, their hierarchy, and then you start measuring your life according to everything you've written out here. And you reflect upon it on a daily basis. Who here is familiar with Stephen Covey, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People? Okay. If you've ever read that, that is also a deep dive into determining what values are most important to you and starting to live up to them. Okay, let's continue on here. Yeah, daily reflection and behavioral alignment is one of the most important processes here. So you reflect upon on a daily or a weekly basis, you ask yourself, did my actions today reflect my highest values? And you sit back and you have to go through all that you've done. And I'll tell you, when you did well, it feels really, really good. And when you didn't do well, you know it. And it may feel bad, but it also tells you what you can do tomorrow. You ask yourself, where did I compromise a value? And again, these are important things. You can't press it aside and ignore it and go through the typical process of denial. You ask yourself, what would a better aligned choice look like the next time? And as you do this, you start to sort of create a character that you like. I always refer to it as you're trying to become the person that you would admire and look up to. And when you start to do that, it's first of all, it feels really good, but it's also very humbling because you're holding your behavior up to a very bright spotlight and being very critical about it. Okay, something that should be important you start thinking about your values is understand that over time, it is very natural for your values to drift and change. So what happens at one point in your life, you'll maybe facing that choice between two values and you realize, wait, that other value is now becoming more important than the other one. And you make a conscious decision to change the values, to switch them. And it's not something you do. I mean, you do it with a lot of thought, but it's not like you're sacrificing anything. You're saying, no, at this point in my life, I am reevaluating what really is most important to me. And this is a very natural process. It shouldn't happen very often, but it will happen over time as your life and your situation changes. What anyone here have any questions? Okay.
Well, this sounds a bit like Stoicism as well, like the virtues and
Yeah,
adjusting virtues. That sort of.
I think it does. it's been a while since I cracked the Stoicism, Seneca's Stoicism, but yes, it
Yeah.
is sort of like that. It makes you step back from your feelings and emotions and begin to look at your life according to the virtues, I think they're called in Stoicism. So very much so. What I've done is on the document on the pyramid of influence, I've created a values elicitation worksheet that you can use on your own. It's at the very end of the document so far. Keep in mind, I'm going to be adding more parts to this document, but it's you can use it on your own. You can use it also as a model if you're working with somebody. And let me tell you, one of the best people to work with for values elicitation is someone whose life is really effed up. You know, everything is falling apart. You know, they just got out of rehab. Their their wife is about ready to kick them out, and you get to you can talk to them, and they're very motivated first to do anything to get their life together. But what this does, it gives them something really intense and important and easy to focus on. And what you can do in a really short amount of time, if you have someone like that, is you give them that worksheet, you give them the instructions, and you'll notice they start to change very quickly. Some things, okay, my internet connection sort of slowed down. Can you guys still hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So I want to give a couple caveats about this. First of all, it is always better to elicit someone's values. And what I mean by that is do not prescribe a value. That is what cults will do. They will tell you what is important and ask you to sacrifice to live up to that particular value. This is all very personal. So don't prescribe someone's values if you're a good person anyway. The other thing is understand that values will change and drift over time, but it's usually very slow and it becomes very obvious when it does happen. And let's see, anything else? Okay, questions or comments?
One, if I may, David,
Yes,
is
Grant.
the words that kept running through my head when we're talking about values was moral principles.
Yes, those would
Because
be the same as a value. Yes,
yeah,
the
yeah,
things
'cause a lot
you
of
know
people
that
when
are
you say
right.
what,
Hmm.
yeah, because when you say like, no, what do you value? People might start thinking to the, as you said, the context specific, like, no, I value my furniture, this, that, and the other,
Hmm.
rather than thinking about the abstracts onto the morals and the principles of it. And as a historical aside, Benjamin Franklin, while he was ambassador in Paris, also led a commission that investigated mesmerism as well.
Yes, yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Uh, you say moral principles. Moral principles will be something more along the lines of the context of what's important in life.
Yeah,
But
the abstract ones as opposed to the
right, the most abstract. But what moral principles do you use to guide your purchase of a vehicle? That's a sort of a strange way to frame uh, a context, but yeah, you understand the context. Okay.
like what do you look for in a car? So
Mhm.
that's I suppose a discrete way of listing values of what do you look for in this, or when you're doing
Mhm.
this, what sort of things do you go for? And quite often I think they'll give some subtle tells about what they hold as
Right.
values for context.
And what the most important thing is, I would like you to take away from this is that you don't, if you just shut up and you listen, people are going to tell you and demonstrate their values. And when you see it, once you sort of tune your sensory perceptions to it, it becomes really obvious. Um, and that is when it's most powerful, is when you can just notice the values that guide them. Of course, this comes with experience, and you have to put yourself out there with other people and have this interaction with them. Any other questions, comments, observations? Okay.
Well, David, one thought
Yes.
is, you touched on how to elicit values. So if you're a car salesman, what's important about this car? And they'll say, oh, well, this has the manual transmission. Okay, well, what's important about that? Oh, well, that comes with the bigger engine thing. Oh, so
Right.
just so I understand you better, having that transmission and the bigger engine, what will that do for you? Oh, well, I'll have the power and it'll really turn heads. So now you know that the guys with gray hair and my age want to turn heads. That's
Right.
our value in that.
That's a good point. And while I've been talking about values mostly on a much broader values according to life, which is good in coaching, what you're talking about is the elicitation process. It's really important in context, and you go levels deeper. And again, Joe, thank you for bringing that up. You don't just get the first thing that they tell you, because that is always going to be a surface response. What's important to you in a car? Well, I want it to be safe. And okay, okay, you want a very safe car. Tell me, when you have a safe car, what does that give you that's important? That's another way of asking what's important about safety.
Mhm.
And they say, oh, well, I have a family and I just want to make sure that they are getting the best. And then you can say, when you know your family's getting the best, what does that give you that's even more important? And they will say, well, peace of mind or love or whatever. That is the value you're going to be hitting on. So and when you go that 1, 2, 3 level deep and you actually hit a value, you're going to see it on their face. And sometimes they'll even tear up. Years ago, I was learning this process and I was selling gym memberships. And I had a guy and his wife come in to get a gym membership. And they had no intention of buying a gym membership. They just wanted whatever gifts we were giving out. And so I asked the wife, I said, well, why, what's important to you about coming to the gym? And she said, well, I want to be healthy. Okay. And I agreed. And I said, what is it about being healthy that is important to you? And she says, well, I haven't really paid a lot of attention to myself, and I think it's important. And I said, okay, well, when you're able to pay attention to yourself and do it fully and completely, what does that give you that's more important? And I almost freaked out because she started to tear up. And he would say, well, I'd be doing this for me. And at that moment, something occurred to me. Okay, you better leave the room and let them talk about it. And I just said, okay, you and your husband have to talk about this. I'm going to take a quick break. I've got to use the restroom. I'll be back in a couple of minutes. And I left. And when I came back, she composed herself and they committed to buy a gym membership. So it can be a little freaky when you elicit that depth of a value, but be prepared for something like that. It doesn't happen all the time, but typically you're going to notice it on their face or in the tone of their voice. So yes. So once again, let's go through that process. You usually go 3 levels deep. You ask them first what's important in the context, and then they're going to give you an answer. That's the first level below the context. Then you ask them, okay, once you have this, what does that give you? It's even more important. They're going to go a level deeper. And the third and final question is, ultimately, when you have this third thing or this second thing, and you have it fully and completely, what does that give you that's ultimately most important? That's when they're going to start talking about a word that's of value. Could be peace of mind or safety or security or family or love. But you're going to notice it in their voice, sometimes their expression. And don't forget that word. Whatever word they say, that's the word you want to sort of plant in and associate with you or your product from that point on. All right.
Before we move
Questions,
on, David,
comments?
if I may ask,
Yes, Graham.
is that example that you've just given about the gym membership and the car salesman? Because I've just been having a quick read on the document so far. Do you think you'd be able to stitch that into it as an example of it in action, so to speak? So I think that what you've just done there would be very elucidating to the whole process to put it into some sort of like real situation.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Yeah, I will put that in the document if that's what you're asking. Absolutely.
Thank you.
All right, very good. Anyone else? Okay.
David, also the thing that it doesn't need to be in the document, so I don't know if you'll put it there or not, but everyone watching, if you're watching this on the replay too, David did soften that. It wasn't just what's important about that, what's important about that. Okay, what'll that give you? You can throw in things like, just so I understand you better. If you had this, what would that do for you? So you can soften it that way so it doesn't seem too much like an interrogation.
Good point. Yeah. You don't want to sound like you're interrogating somebody. You want to sound like you're genuinely curious and you're compassionate and you're caring. And so you want to lean in and you want to pause and you want to make a little distancing statement like that sounds so important. And it does make me curious when you have this, what does that give you that's even more important? So yes, what are they called? They're called softening statements, I believe. So yes, very good point. All right. Anything else?
Well, I think this leads perfectly into some of your expertise over the years, David. Um, since you've just shown how to elicit the values, in the very traditional way, which I have to point out for everyone, it shocks me how many people, NLP master practitioners, don't know how to do that. I guess they weren't paying attention that day.
Yeah.
But we can also determine without the traditional elicitation. So if you would touch on that.
Again, without traditional elicitation, you have people just talk about things that are interesting to them, or you guide them in the context that you want, which is, tell me about a relationship that really had an impact on you. Assuming you're in a dating scenario, the relationship will be implied. Tell me about the most positive experience you had uh, in a dating relationship. Or if you, so again, just by listening, people are going to describe things that are important to them. So that's one of the best ways of really having a dramatic effect. You don't have to elicit or go through the questioning. But you do have to fine tune your awareness to do that. So you have to practice. So definitely practice. All right.
I think that's a great thing, whether someone's eliciting values or they're just determining them. It really helps if you're genuinely interested in the person you're talking to. And it reminds me, one of my first trainers in NLP, Michael Beale, would use two phrases a lot. Instead of the meta model, what does that mean to you? Or just tell me more. And those two can get a lot more information that's helpful in that.
Oh, and let me encourage you to avoid asking one question. And you're going to make this mistake because I did it. You will ask them, why is that important? You don't want to know why it's important. That sounds like an interrogation. They have to consciously justify what is important. And I have screwed that up in a job interview. Why is having someone competent important for this job? No, that's stupid. So don't ask why. Ask what is important about it to you. Okay. So be aware of that. Don't ask why. Don't ask why. All right. Okay. Questions or comments? I want to do a quick wrap up and talk about what we'll be doing next week.
Don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, Alex.
Oh, thank goodness for that. Okay. My headphones have been banjacks. The only thing I could hear has been the sound from this laptop. I don't know why. Seems to work okay otherwise. But you were mentioning how you drill down through the different layers. Well, that was something similar when one of my work colleagues, I'm going to call her Tracy, it's not her real name, but she was having difficulty with quitting smoking. She'd gone through the patches, she did the whole willpower thing like that, wasn't working. But I had tried to find out what it was that she valued. And it turned out that it had been a long, long story, but her ex-boyfriend at the time had got her smoking in the first place, and she didn't want that. And it turned out that the ultimate value that she wanted was that her current boyfriend, she wanted to keep the boyfriend because the boyfriend was basically, she felt that if she was still smoking, it would ruin the relationship with the boyfriend. Plus, also, she had her own kids, and she did not want the kids to grow up seeing her smoking, and she didn't want her kids to become smokers themselves.
Right.
So that's what she was working on. But it was all about family and relationship, and it was all the things that all the people she was connected to, and they were more important. That they saw her as a non-smoker. So that's how I approached it. So that it gave her that choice to be able to determine her values and then to go forward as a non-smoker. And that worked on her beliefs, went down to her emotions, went down to her behavior. So she quit because I found out what her true values were.
That's perfect. That's a great example. For what I realized as you're describing that, I do work a little bit of values into the second session. If you've got the hypnosis manual, the second session describes finding a person that you would look up to who is free from the habit. And what I do prior to the hypnosis session is I ask them to think of someone who lives by a set of standards, values, qualities of character that they would admire. So I don't specifically try to get a whole list of values or a very long elicitation. I just ask, what are the things that you admire in someone that you would look up to? And that is enough of the values. And I remind them that they have these values, but they're not exercised. And then through that second session hypnosis process, they go through a process of seeing the person demonstrate these values, then as a third person watching themselves demonstrate these values, and then actually feeling these values and going through their life. So again, it's not in depth like this whole discussion is. It's brief, but it gets a really good result. And it starts to help them change how they see themselves. Any other questions or comments? Thank you, Alex. All right. What I want to talk about is what we're going to be talking about next week, which I'm going to talk about the whole concept of identity. And what I have found out is that cults get their power not by using persuasions or values or beliefs. What they do is they get their power by changing how someone sees themselves. And someone I know of actually sort of followed along a cult recruiter for a little while to sort of determine what it was that made their magic sauce so good about getting people into the cult. And they said it's really about changing how they see themselves. And he could have been talking about a cult recruiter, but I think he might have been talking about a military recruiter, because that is certainly one way that they get people into the military. is they change how they see themselves, seeing themselves someone who will stand tall and demonstrate these wonderful behaviors. And once someone starts to identify them with that, the choice of joining the military is a really easy choice. So that's what we're going to talk about next week. And the last thing I want to leave you with is, if any of you are doing coaching, if any of you are doing hypnosis, if you don't know about it, artificial intelligence is coming, but this is a job that's going to last for a while beyond artificial intelligence. There are only several types of jobs that are going to endure whatever artificial intelligence takes away. One are the jobs that, like judges and doctors, that always the type of job that needs a human to oversee it. They may use artificial intelligence, but they're going to need a human being to sort of make the final okay. Another is experience workers, people who are like provide experiences for people. So we're talking about tour guides. We're talking about massage therapists and sex workers and hypnotists. So you are definitely in this area where your personal skill is going to be lasting and be valuable far beyond what the artificial intelligence will take on, and people will always value it. And the better you get, the more people are going to want it. So, Joe, questions, comments, anyone else before we wrap up?
Yeah, well, David, I don't want to ramble on, but since we have time, I think the topic of future pacing works perfectly because, like we've talked about, I use that in dating. Car salesmen, everyone really in sales uses it. And I know as a hypnotist, it's very useful when, the line, now you see yourself as a non-smoker, but being able to use the line of, and 10, 15 years down the road, when you see yourself in that scenario of the values, you can look back to today and smile knowing it started right here.
Yeah.
And that very powerful stuff. So this is the pyramid of influence, this whole section. I hope everyone goes over it multiple times even.
I hope I did it justice. I think the document is really good, but you're absolutely right. Always future pace when you get a good result and you got a good outcome. Have them practice it in the future forever and ever. So that's excellent. All right.
Well, and the future pacing, of course, I believe that leads to the identity, which next week's topic, and how you can get those godlike results.
Yeah, indeed. All right. All right, guys.
Question, if I may.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, and it's probably might be like straying into next week's territory in regards to identity, but one thing that struck me about values is it's sort of acts like a bridge between the identity and the behaviors.
Yep. It definitely does. No, that's a very clear observation. Yeah. Once we start dealing with how people see themselves, the values start to align, and beliefs start to align, emotions, behaviors. So yeah, it's very much deeply connected. And so, and again, the greatest benefit you're going to get from any of the work on the pyramid of influence is doing it on yourself. And so I hope you will take some time to do that. All right. Okay, guys, because you're here, you're not somewhere else, so you had to take some time to sacrifice to be here, and I deeply appreciate it. You guys did so well. We're going to get back again next week talking about this identity and how to influence identity, and we'll go from there. Thanks again. Please take care.
Thanks, Dave. Good talk this evening.
See you next week, everyone.
Yeah, sweet.